I never thought the people I loved the most would one day want me dead. My name is William, at 60. After years of endless work, sweat, and sacrifice, I believed I had earned peace. I sold the company I built from scratch for $70 million. That number still echoes in my mind, 70 million. It was supposed to be my reward, my freedom, my family's future. But I didn't know that same number would soon become the price on my life. I built a company with my hands and my back. I slept on a hard floor when work was urgent. I ate late and missed birthdays. I missed small things that do not seem important until you realize you can never get them back. I told myself those were the prices of building something that mattered. I told myself the money would make it fair. I told myself that when the day came, my family would be there with open eyes and honest smiles. They were there. They smiled. But the smiles were thin. The eyes were hungry. When the official paper came across my desk and the bank clerk said the number out loud, $70 million, something inside me loosened. I felt a weight lift. It mattered little that I had no use for it all. The company was finished as a job for me. The sale meant I could finally rest. It meant I could give my wife and son the world I had denied them through years of long nights. It meant a new life of calm. So I wanted one good night. A night that could be a memory. A simple tour. I took my wife Collie and my son Jason to the city. We walked the old places I once took them years ago. We ate at the restaurant where I had once celebrated a small contract. I chose the best table, the table with the view, because that night I wanted to show them the man I had become. They chose clothes and smiles. They practiced small lines, but they did it naturally. That was the worst part. The practice looked real. Real enough to fool most people. The city lights made the restaurant glow like a jewel. I remember thinking, as I sat between them, that if this were all the world had to offer, then I had given a good life. Jason lifted his glass. To Dad, he said. To the man who never gave up. Collie leaned in. Her fingers touched my wrist. They were warm. Her eyes said more than her mouth. You earned it, William. You did it. Their words felt like rust and gold. I accepted them. I accepted the toast. I told myself that a father can be proud without doubt. We ate. We spoke of small things. The waiter poured wine. I remember the feel of the glass. I recall the taste of the first bite. The food was good, like so many things that night. It was easy to forget the world outside the restaurant. Then the dessert arrived. Jason insisted I take the first spoon. It's the best in the city, he said with the arrogance of a man who thinks the world owes him pleasure. He smiled at me. He looked like my son. He looked like a man I had once taught to stand straight. I took a bite of the chocolate mousse. The flavor was rich. Then a pain pierced the center of my chest, a sudden hot twist in my stomach. I blinked. The light on the table seemed to move. My breath came shorter. Jason noticed. Collie reached for my hand, but she did not sound afraid. Her voice was soft. Are you all right, love? She asked with calm that smelled like planning. I moved to the restroom. My reflection in the glass was a stranger. Sweat dotted my face even though the room was cool. My mouth tasted wrong. My heart beat like a drum in a thin room. Then the waiter came in. He looked at me like a man carrying a problem. He did not speak loud. He bent and whispered, Sir, I saw him. He poured something while you were on the phone. I thought it was a mistake. I thought to say nothing, but I could not. Please get help. Those words landed like stones. I held them in my hand. I folded them into a paper in my pocket like a small weapon. My first reaction could have been anger. I could have stood on the table and called them killers. I could have smashed glasses and called the police. Instead, I chose a slow quiet. Rage burns your fuel. It wastes what you need for a different war. So I smiled. I walked back to the table and I sat like a man who trusted his family. Jason made a joke. Kali laughed. She reached for my glass and offered it to me. To celebrate, she said. Her smile was a thin map. I raised my hand. I let my son top my glass. We drank. I felt the cool wine pass my lips like cold air. I held my face. When we left, I said I wanted to drive alone for a while. I told the driver a different place to go. I told Kali to call him later. I watched them leave. Their car vanished in a red trail. My chest felt heavy, and the paper from the waiter warmed my pocket like a small truth. I did not go home. I checked into a small hotel on the clean edge of the city. I sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling. Each tile felt like a memory. I called my doctor and asked for a checkup. I lied and said I felt dizzy. The doctor at the hospital took my blood and pressed on my skin. The laboratory ran tests in a line of white machines. I lay in a chair that felt too soft. The hours moved in slow lines. When the doctor returned, his face was calm and heavy. "There is a foreign compound in your blood," he said. "Not a full lethal dose, not yet. But you were poisoned. It looks like a targeted blend. The good news? You came early. We can treat it." A small thing happened inside me then. The waiter's slip made sense. The pain made sense. My son's smile at the table made sense. Everything joined like the threads of a cloth. I took the antidote. They gave me fluid. The doctors were professional and careful. Yet their care could not touch the faster movement that had already begun in me. Once you know someone has tried to end your life, you never sleep the same way again. When I left the hospital and walked toward home, I felt like a man walking through a room full of glass. Everything could break. But I had one advantage. I had built a life on facts and paper. I had learned the quiet movement of the pen can do much more than a raised voice. They met me at the front door. They hugged me and kissed me and cried small stage tears. Their hands were soft like practice. "Dad, you're back," Kali cried. Jason held my hand like a boy seeking a favor. Their faces were perfect performances. That should have been my cue for fury. Instead, I felt a great sorrow that pressed to my ribs. How had my home become a room where knives hide behind smiles? I could let my fury be loud, or I could make it surgical. The world had been built by my patience. Now I would use that patience to return what was taken. The first thing I did was to gather the facts. I reviewed the security footage from the restaurant. The waiter had been honest. Jason leaned over my dessert. He cupped the spoon in a way like a man who gives a final touch. Kali nodded and then smiled. The movement was quick but clear. I copied the footage. I stored it on 2 drives and placed a third copy with a lawyer. Evidence is cold. It does not scream. It does not demand immediate revenge. It waits. Then I set other small things in motion. In a life tied to money, each paper is an artery. I began to move small valves. I changed signatories on one account. I placed temporary blocks on another. I called the trustee company I had used for the sale, and I asked them to set a hold on large withdrawals until new identification could be confirmed. I opened new trust accounts for funds that would remain untouched. I made these moves not in panic but in quiet steps. When a man has control of accounts, he can cut access without a fight. That would be my first lesson. I also hired a private investigator. He was a man used to secrets. He called himself Michael. He had worked cases with quiet hands and fewer questions. He dug into Jason's bank accounts. He called a friend at the bank where Kali kept her modest accounts. He discovered small patterns, transfers right before major bills, cash withdrawals to vendors with no clear record, a phone number linked to known loan sharks. These pieces were not the head of a snake. They were the smaller bones that made the skeleton look intact. When the investigator reported that someone had indeed helped Jason to find ways to get quick cash, I felt a kind of null and hardening anger. But it was righteous. I had expected greed. I had not expected murder. There is a difference. At night I could not sleep. I walked the hallways. I opened old letters and read invoices I had kept for years. I remembered the first truck I bought, how the wheels stuck in the mud, how I paid back the bank in installments. I remembered the child who clapped when I came home with a small toy. Those memories turned sharp like a needle. I felt the betrayal in my marrow. Then I set small traps. I called the accountant who managed the company sale. I told her we needed to revisit the distribution, paperwork to ensure everything, for my estate would be governed by new trustees. I asked her to make amendments. I did not give the reason. I did not want the lawyer curious. He executed the changes like a man who knows the value of a signature. Next, I called the bank manager, a man who had stood with me at the opening ceremony for our charity, donations, and who knew me by the firmness of my handshake. I asked him to place a hold on any transfers above a certain limit. I asked him to flag any unusual withdrawals and to alert me personally. He did not ask why. These moves made me feel like a surgeon stitching small but vital things together. I had no illusions that this would be a quick end. The plan I would use required time. Time gives you the chance to let a mask slip and reveal the face below. I also strengthened my house's defense. New locks, a second safe, and most of all, small recorders hidden in the living room clock, in a lamp, behind the painting of the beach I love. I never liked putting small devices inside my home. But the home where your life is targeted deserves to speak truth. One night, while Jason slept in his room and Coley watched old television in the living room, I sat in the study and listened to the house breathe. Outside, the city was a soft light. Inside, I felt like a predator with a steel diet of patience. On the third night, the recorders captured the conversation I waited for. Jason's voice was low. He's getting suspicious. He's not acting like he always does. Callie's voice answered, softer. We will handle it. We can try again when he trusts us. Give it time. A chill cut my spine. Their small talk sounded like the rustle of a plan. My hands felt heavy with grief. This was my blood. It was my life. The thought of them planning my death did more than make me angry. It made me break open with sorrow. I sat with the feeling and let it wash. I let it make my bones strong. The man who had built a company from the ground learned a new thing. Betrayal by family is like being underwater. You either panic and thrash or you take a calm breath and move with intention. I chose the latter. So my plan began. I announced small changes at home as if they were harmless. I spoke to Jason about retirement and the need for careful oversight. I suggested he review his investments more closely. I offered to help with paperwork. Each word was a small knife with a different aim. At the same time I moved the money. Shares were placed into new structures. Properties were transferred to trusts that required multiple signatures and long verification processes. For a man with wealth, a signature is the more lethal weapon than a bullet. I set up conditions that would protect the funds from immediate withdrawal. I had no desire to hide the truth. I desired a fair end. I desired to take their teeth out in a way that left them alive to puzzle over what happened. When an account manager called to confirm a new mandate, I played the role of the weary father who wanted things simple. But the signatures I arranged were not for them. They were for the trust I had prepared in my name. If Jason wanted to have access, he would need to pass through legal tests that would require his cooperation and truth. That was the first trap. The second was more personal. I arranged a discreet meeting with Luz, the waiter who had warned me. I paid him not because money motivates him, but because a man who speaks up deserves to be recognized. I asked him to remember the faces at the table exactly as they were during the night. He gave me the little details the surveillance missed. A tremor in Jason's hand, how Collie said a line under her breath, and how a small silver box moved under the table. I told Louis I had already saved the video and that he had my gratitude. He was shocked at my calm. He said, "Sir, I thought I was only saving one man's life. I did not know it would grow into a whole story." I told him to be careful and to keep his head down. He nodded, a man who had seen that simple acts can split a life. While I tightened the legal work, Michael, the investigator, dug into Jason's world. He found short loans at impossible interest. He found a harsh creditor who had men looking around town. He found a pattern of men feeding young dreamers fast money with heavy chains. This information was not for a show. It was to create a pressure. When the world tightens, men make mistakes. Once I had the legal structures in place and the pressures applied, I started to let the cracks show. I let Jason feel a minor inconvenience. "Check your emails," I told him casually. He opened his phone and went white. "Dad, my fund. It says frozen," he cursed. He called numbers. He found people answered with a nervousness he had never seen before. I watched him like a man watching the color change in a sky before a storm. Collie reacted differently. She began to call me with an increased sweetness. "You must be tired, William. We will get help. Let us manage the paperwork for you." Her voice was a knife wrapped in silk. I answered back with a quiet voice. "I appreciate that, Collie. Let us not rush." I placed small phrases as if painting a portrait that hid the man beneath. One evening, while the house hummed with small normal things, Jason stormed into my office with his face red. He accused me of being unfair. "You are restricting me," he said. "These are my plans." I sat still and said, "You should have been honest. You wanted what I have without the patience. I won't hand it to you like a prize. You trusted greed, not me." He shouted back about how the world owes him everything. I let him rage. The man in his eyes was not a son, but an actor on a stage, where the lines had been rehearsed. After he left, I turned the recorder on and let the room keep the wordless presence. I was not a man seeking revenge for the joy of taking. I was a man who had been shown a choice by those he loved, and had decided to reclaim his dignity. The nights grew long. One found an old photograph. My son as a boy sitting on a small wooden chair with chocolate on his mouth. I remembered putting him to bed despite a broken engine and a stack of unpaid bills. I remembered teaching him to tie a shoe, teaching him to be honest. Those lessons had eroded like paint. Between the legal moves and the small pressures, I still visited my doctor. I let my body rest. I took long walks and thought about the type of man I wanted to be in the final pages of my life. Some people would have told me to burn them to the ground. I refused that. I wanted them to learn. I wanted them to feel the weight of what their hands had tried to take, so I did not confront them in a courtroom. I did not rage publicly. I pulled the threads slowly. I let the trust structures do their work. I let creditors call when Jason missed payment after payment. I had Michael seed information with the men who had loaned him money. I had the investigators call certain vendors to check receipts. The house of cards Jason had built began to tumble quietly. One late night, while Collie washed plates and Jason scrolled the news, I sat in the living room and watched them. Their laughter came like a far echo. I remembered the waiter's paper in my pocket and the cold clarity that followed. They had plotted to end my life for money. Their strategy had been small and personal. My strategy would be slow and surgical. I was not proud of what I would do, but I was honest about it. Men who try to kill do not deserve immediate mercy, and yet I carried another weight: sadness. I felt a deep regret that the people I loved had broken their love into a currency. I felt as if everything I built had become an object, and not a reason for human warmth. That feeling was worse than any legal victory, so I prepared for a show, the show where I would allow them to attempt to hold me again, and then watch them fumble. I would let them think they were safe while I collected the final pieces. I would give them opportunities to reveal themselves with words and gestures. Each reveal would be another supporting beam removed. The legal holds were in place. The recorders had recorded more incriminating talk. The investigator had collected proof of the loans and the men involved. Jason's major accounts were limited. Collie had small accounts moved and tracked. I had the video of the dessert. I had enough, but I had not yet shown any of it. Why? Because the best blows land when the other side has not yet braced. I wanted them to feel their ground shift, to have their breath tighten. That moment would be more devastating than a shout. The night before I planned to make a move, I sat alone at the edge of the small lake behind the house. Rain had blurred the lights. I watched my face in the water and asked myself what kind of man I would be. Revenge is not simply about taking. It has to teach a lesson. It has to bring the other person to a place where they understand the cost. The plan I set in motion would do exactly that. They would not die. I did not want blood. I wanted the loss of what they thought had been guaranteed. I wanted them to wake and find the world different because of what they had tried to do. In the quiet, both a promise and a wound rested. The wound was my hurt. The promise was the slow work of law and truth. I rose and walked back into the house. When I opened the door, the house looked ordinary. Collie smiled. Jason joked about a snack. Their ordinary pretenses were thin. I had watched them build their shame. I had watched them lay their plans. I thought of my son as a boy, and then as the man who had put poison in his father's dessert. How could I be the same man after that? I do not know. Some things break a life and leave a different man behind. So I decided to be that different man. I do not claim innocence. I claim strategy. I claim the right to live after someone tried to take my life for money. I claim the right to be sure I leave the world in a way that is honest. The first chapter of my revenge is over. The second chapter will be when I let them know that the man they tried to kill is the man who will now decide their fate. They will still have breath to feel the consequences. They will still have time to plead. They will still see their cars and the house fall away. They will still cry, and when they cry, I will remember the waiter who did not look away and the small paper in my pocket that saved my life. I will remember the look on my son's face at the table. I will remember that I had tried to give them everything, and they decided to repay me with death. For now, I sleep in the middle of a house that no longer feels like a home. I carry the sorrow like a coat. The world has changed and so have I. I do not seek a noisy revenge. I seek a justice that is felt. They will know that their small choice to put poison in a glass changed everything about the life they expected to inherit. And they will see the cost. When the time comes, I will show them the receipts. I will show them the cameras. I will show them the waiter's note. I will not shout. I will simply hand them the truth and watch them understand that they chose to break a man they called father. The morning the trap started to bite, Jason was the first to notice. He had been living in a bubble of credit and fast deals. He had never learned the patient work of building assets. He expected wealth to be a door that opens once he knocks. I arranged for his broker to call him with calm, neutral words. "Mr. Jason, we've placed a hold pending. Confirmation of source. Funds." The speech was professional. No drama. But to men like Jason, drama is the only language. He panicked. He cursed and called me. He asked what I knew. He accused me of some betrayal of trust. I answered with slow words. "Check the trust papers. Some accounts require 2 signatures. It's part of the sale agreement. It's for security." I let my voice be steady and small. Panic looks worse when others are calm. At the same time, quietly, I had set another wheel in motion. There were old contractors and vendors who had been paid by Jason's shadow deals. Michael, my investigator, called a few and asked for copies of invoices and delivery receipts. The receipts came back messy and small. One vendor admitted that a payment had been returned when a check bounced. Another vendor said their men called in late one night to collect a debt. The men Vincent had recommended were not gentle. They were the type who make threats, not promises. Michael flagged the files. He linked numbers and dates with my sales timeline. With each file, the frame around Jason's life got tighter. What Jason did not understand is that when a man steps toward greed, he makes more noise. He begins to contact people. He makes mistakes. He signs a wrong paper. The world has a way of revealing itself to the patient eye. Kali reacted differently. She did not panic with shouting. That was her style. She applied charm and heat. She called friends and tried to mobilize emotional support. She liked to present herself as the woman wronged by an old husband with a fever. She played the part of the hurt wife well, but records do not care for good actors. Records show bank transfers. Records show when a ring of men moved money through shell companies. My legal team was quiet. They filed motions to confirm trust mandates. They asked third parties to produce documentation. They wrote letters that read like thin iron blades. When lawyers start to write, men who have been used to easy withdrawals begin to tremble. The first crack was a phone call from a loan shark to Jason. "Pay up," the man said. "No more time," Jason swallowed. He called Kali and then he called me, each call louder and more frantic. I answered with a small calmness. "Pay what you owe first. We'll help check the paperwork." He yelled a stream of accusations. He suggested the sale had been a trick. He accused me of senility, of not remembering. His accusations were the sound of a man trying to throw dirt to blind others. I let him talk. I let him tire. I made notes. The second move was public, but quiet. I arranged for one of my old close associates to host a charity event and mentioned, offhand, a future trust review. In public, I spoke about values and responsibility. I presented as the old man who had worked hard. Kali and Jason attended the event. They smiled for photos. They walked the gala like people who had inherited shine. Later, a small news nugget ran. Local philanthropist asks for stricter transparency in trust. Allocations. It was nothing. Yet the watchers took note. Sponsors asked questions. Sponsors that once admired Kali's posts wanted more room between image and money. What happens when donations dry? What happens when sponsors look for clean names and find a crumbed image? Calls begin to land on a phone like small stones. Sponsors asked for audits. Volunteers murmured. Now their world began to smell faintly of worry. Next, I set a legal freeze that would hurt them more than any shout. My lawyer filed an emergency notice with the trustee. The documents required verified identity and the presence of an independent auditor if any large. Withdrawal was attempted. The trustee, obliged by the contract and by my clear legal conscience, placed those holds. The financial manager could do no more without paperwork. Jason clicked through his phone and watched balances with a growing nightmare in his eyes. He had expected bloodless access. He had expected an old man to be easily convinced. He had expected a father to be a simple signature away. Instead, the signature would require audit, time, and independence. Their little world of fast money met a slow procedure and slowed to anger. Kali saw it first in his face. "Do something," she hissed when he came home late. "Pressure him. Make him sign." She wanted the door open. She wanted to fix the quick problem of cash by prying open the old safe door. He tried. He made calls. He argued with trust managers. The managers were firm. They needed documentation. They needed an audit. That was when Jason made his next mistake. He called a man who offered a fast fix in cash. He wanted immediate transfers. That man, a small-time fixer named Sato, had a reputation for quick hands and fewer questions. Michael traced Sato's number and found a chain of calls to a bank in a distant town. Michael set up a quiet meeting with a compliance officer in that bank on the pretext of due diligence. The compliance officer was a boy I once helped when he was a clerk. I had hired him for a summer years ago, and he had watched me walk into a house with nothing and leave my name on files. The man remembered me. He agreed to look into a few transfers for a fee. He found one. He put a stop. The men involved got anxious. I watch such things, and I do not celebrate. I measure. The small stops were like pebbles that cause a landslide. When enough are placed in a row, the final pressure technique was social exposure. I expected them to panic and start to point fingers. I expected gaslighting to begin. And gaslighting did begin. I heard their phone calls. Collie called neighbors and whispered stories of an old husband who was getting paranoid. She called friends and asked for sympathy. She asked if they wanted to host a small dinner to show they supported her and Jason. I let her. I watched as her network shrank. Organizations that once wanted her image now called back to check facts. One former sponsor privately said, "We prefer transparency before association." Translation: keep your image clean or we step away. The emotional weight settled on Kali like a quiet poison. She had planned to be safe under the bright cloth of social approval. She had not expected the cloth to thin. Weeks passed and they made new mistakes. They attempted a second poison plan, a plan that would have been clumsy if not desperate. Jason thought he could slip a substance into a tea at night while I slept. He prepared it in secret. He left a small vial under his pillow where he thought I would never find it. Michael found it first. He traced the vial's purchases. He found the shop and the card used for the purchase. Paper trails exist for reckless men. We collected it like a child picks flowers for a show. I did not arrest him in the house. I did not scream. Instead, I studied the vial and the handwriting on the receipt. I put the vial in a small evidence bag and labeled it. I wanted the quiet power of proof. Now men might think I took the path of cold revenge only. But I had a meeting that almost broke me. One night, while I sorted papers at the desk, I found a small note. A note I had kept in my wallet like a tiny memory, the waiter's paper. Under the fluorescence of the desk lamp, the words seemed brittle. I felt again the weight. I sat down hard and put my head in my hands. The urge to go to them and shout rent my ribs. I wanted to crush the two who had put a man's life at risk, but I did not. I told myself that if I let scream be the voice of my end, I would only give them more ammunition. They could say I was a violent old man with a temper. They could turn the story. So I moved the rods of law and of reputation like the hands of a clock. Time would tell. One morning, the town paper ran a small piece about an audit starting. An old friend of mine who wrote a column asked two neutral questions that opened a small leak. Transparency matters to donors. Should image matter more than actions? He wrote. The article made little waves, but waves become tides. Jason's panic grew. He phoned creditors and received calls that were sharp. Money that seemed always available melted. He argued with men at night. His sleep vanished. He made calls to Sato for quick cash, and Sato demanded assurances the like of which a man in panic cannot provide. Then came the day of my reveal. I had a choice to make. I could have collapsed to fury and shown them the evidence dramatically. But the strategy required more pain. They had attempted to kill me. I had survived. Instead of immediate confrontation, I wanted humiliation that taught. I wanted them to feel the slow collapse of the life they had thought belonged to them. My lawyer arranged a family meeting under the guise of reviewing estate planning. I sat in the living room and let the house hold its breath. Collie walked in with careful steps. Jason came in hot and tired. They both expected to be praised. They expected an easy signature to fix the problems they had created. I smiled and stood. Sit, I said, and my voice was calm. They sat. The lawyer sat with a neutral face. The investigator and the bank manager were present. I had asked a few people I trusted to be there, not to be colorful, but to make the room honest. I started. I did not shout. The first thing I handed them was a small paper, the waiter's note. I let it rest on the table between us like a small stone. Jason's face changed. Callie's lips pressed thin. I was warned, I said simply. I went to the hospital. The tests showed poison. You tried to end my life. I watched them. They looked away at first. Then Callie's mouth opened. She tried to say something, to make the old trick of begging and spinning stories. But the lawyer was prepared. He put the vial on the table, an evidence bag with a label, and the receipts and the footage. He played a file of the restaurant security. There they were, frozen small on the screen. Jason leaning over, a hand moving like a secret. I did not shout. When Callie began to cry, it sounded staged. She put on the performance of a woman who had been misunderstood. But the evidence did not care for acting. The investigators gave their report that traced the loans and the quick cash. The bank manager explained that the trust mandates were such that large withdrawals needed verified signatures, and that the trustees had a duty to protect assets. Then I did the part that would hurt most. I told them what I had already done. My shares, I said slowly, are placed in trusts with multiple signatories. Your names are not public beneficiaries. Certain assets are now under managed funds. Others are in escrow for future philanthropic obligations. I froze access for emergency withdrawals because someone here tried to poison Emmy for money. Jason's fist hit the couch. What, Dad? You can't do that. Those are our plans. You promised. I kept my voice quiet. I promised to protect what we built. I protected it from the people who tried to poison me. If you had been honest, we would have spoken together. You chose poison. They begged. Callie moaned, William, please, don't do this. We were desperate. We made mistakes. We love you. Her hands reached out like a child. I watched them fall apart. The car keys were on the table. The bank cards lay like small flags of surrender. I did not take anything immediately. The trustees had set the legal wheels to pull control away. The bank put temporary holds. The law did not require immediate seizure. But the moral ground shifted. The town knew. The sponsors were nervous. The men who had lent Jason money smelled trouble, and the more they moved in panic, the more traps closed. Jason ran to the men he owed. One after another, the men called him with short, sharp words. A debt collector came and demanded payment at midnight. He demanded cash. Jason tried to sell a car. He went to trade it, and the title was missing, transferred to a trust for maintenance with my name. Panic leads to more mistakes. The men who issue quick loans will eat a man alive when they smell weakness. Callie went to friends. The friends were polite but distant. We will help, some said, but only as long as they could. Reputation is a fragile bird. It flees when storms come. Her social circle shrank to whispers. At night, they cried. They held each other. And they begged me like two small children. They fell at my feet and asked forgiveness. They asked me to sign forms to restore access. Their pleas were wet ropes thrown to a man who had already decided to take a different path. I had time to think. Do I ruin them utterly and leave nothing? Do I push them to absolute ruin and watch them die in shame? Or do I do what justice asks and teach the price of their act? I chose control. I took their keys for a while. I called the trustee and asked for a formal hearing. The trust required oversight. During the hearing, records would be read. The public would know the attempt. The press would ask delicate questions. Sponsors would withdraw. The house would not fall in a day. It would crumble in the patient way of a dry wall when water runs through. Still, I did one more cold thing. The house they lived in, the place that had watched my life, remained in my control. Not because I wanted tyranny. Because I realized the truth in a small dark hour. A man who tries to kill his father for money cannot be trusted with the keys to a home. Not again. I went to a lawyer and filed for an island emergency temporary protective order over the estate and the house, citing criminal intent and a credible threat. It was a risky move, but the evidence I had built was heavy. The judge looked through the files and ordered a temporary freeze on certain assets pending criminal inquiry. That freeze meant many things. Cars could not be refinanced. Banks would not transfer titles. A man who thought he could drive off into night with cash found the gates closed. Jason screamed. He beat at walls. He called names. He accused me of being cruel. I let him say it. I did not respond with equal cruelty. I answered only with facts and the occasional quiet question, why? He had no answer that matched the deed. Then the final blows came from a direction I had set. People's trust. Sponsors and partners who had once whispered praise now sent cold messages. A magazine that had featured Kali removed the profile. A social platform paused a planned collaboration. The Charity Commission asked for documents. Small things measure large consequences. Their image, once a bridge to money, now electrical with doubt. 1 week after the hearing, I told them plainly what I would do. I sat in the study and I looked at my son and my wife, and I spoke like a father who had been refused the most basic gift, love. You tried to kill me for money, I said. You thought I was an object to be removed. I saved myself because someone told me. You have stolen nothing by my death because your theft is your own. But I will do what justice allows. I will not watch my life be taken by those I taught to love. They cried and begged. They pushed papers. They accused me kindly and harshly. They tried every story. They tried repentance. But the law had teeth. Trusts never betray a note. They protect. Then the hardest thing came. The judge, seeing the files, granted a temporary reorganization. The house was not given to them. Cars were parked under custodian orders. The bank released auditors' requests and disallowed certain transfers. The world, which had opened like a bright mouth to Jason, closed like a book. I walked out of the hearing room with my papers. I did not gloat. I felt hollow. When a son tries to end his father's life, something of the world's color dies. I believe that with a kind of quiet certainty. One evening, when they had been reduced to pleading, when their faces had grown thin from worry, Kali knelt before me one last time. Her voice wobbed, small and sharp. "William, please," she said. "I will sign anything. Make it right again." Her eyes were wet, and there was a real electricity of regret. I looked at her. I saw a woman who had loved the idea of security more than the man who had given it. The thought of pity weighed on me for a second. Then memory cut into that pity, his hand over my dessert. The waiter's paper. The vial in the evidence bag. The recordings of late nights. I could have forgiven in words, but the wiser path was to hold them to the truth. So I did something she did not expect. I slid the divorce papers across the table myself. "Sign this," I said. "You can keep what the law allows you now, but I will never trust anyone who tried to end my life." She screamed softly and then clung to me. She begged me to reconsider, and I did not. I had spent decades building a place where our children could grow. I had never dreamed it would be a place where death was planned. Next, I did what any man who is hurt and not cruel would do. I gave Jason a short choice. Go away and build a life, or stay and watch what little trust you have turned to ash. He chose to leave. I handed him a small bag and the keys to a small apartment I had owned under a different name, enough to survive but not to rebuild. He left with a bag of clothes and a head full of hatred that would not help him. Kali stayed for a few weeks to settle things, sign papers, and collect what she could. The house belonged to the trust now. The cars were moved into custody. The title papers were frozen. The world they had thought would be theirs was no longer theirs by right. It had been reclaimed by law. When it was over, I stood in the empty living room and felt a sorrow so deep that no court could measure it. I had not wanted to break my life this way, but I had wanted to live. I had wanted to live with dignity. I took the waiter's note out again, and I held it. I remembered Louis, who risked his job and perhaps more by telling a truth. I thought of how small acts save lives and how big acts destroy families. Later, alone on the porch, I whispered to the night, "I spared you death. I will not spare a life that kills for money." Those words were not cruel. They were the boundaries a man sets when his heart is broken. In the months after the legal reorganization, the world changed gently around me. The press wrote cold articles about a family scandal. The neighbors looked at Collie and Jason with a new quiet. Sponsors refused to be linked. Men who had loaned Jason money closed their accounts. Sato disappeared. The small men who had fed on quick money realized the house was no longer a place of easy prey. I neither rejoiced nor danced. Revenge had not turned sweet. It tasted like ash, but it was precise. It removed the instruments that had planned my death. It taught them something that I hoped would be heavier than their guilt, the weight of living with the knowledge of what they had tried to do. I rebuilt a small life. I sold the larger vehicles. I kept a modest home in the country, and I moved slowly. I donated portions of the sale to causes I wanted, insisting on transparency and real audits. The money that could have been used for play was used to repair trust where it could be rebuilt. Sometimes friends asked if I felt satisfied. I told them the truth. Satisfaction is not mine. I feel an end to fear. I feel an end to the possibility of being killed by the ones I love. Beyond that, the world is soft. I do not boast. I only write this as a fact. Men sometimes talk about revenge as a bright theater. For me, revenge was a legal slow march. It was written in filings, not flames. It left them alive, but their lives were different. Collie remade herself, quietly, awkwardly. Jason left town and tried again. He failed a few times and learned nothing, then learned something and changed slowly. I forgave in the only way I could. I removed the power they had tried to steal. I did not destroy them beyond hope. I destroyed only the ability to hurt me again. In the end, I learned a sharp truth. Money can be a test, and not always a good one. It reveals the measure of people. Those who love you for what you are will stand with you in the winter of your life. Those who love the idea of a wallet will step into a darker shape when the world offers temptation. If I could say one thing to my son, now that time has given both of us space, I would say, your choices wrote you into this story. I hope the rest of your life rewrites the pages with honesty. Do not wish him destroyed. I only wish him hard lessons. And for Collie, who once said she loved me more than money, I would say, you had your chance. She did not listen then. She might now. This is my story. It is not a story of dramatic violence. It is the story of a quiet reclaim. It is the story of a man who survived the attempt on his life and then used what he had, law, truth, and patience, to take back what was his. It is the story of a father who will never again mistake a smile for love when it has teeth.